Hello, beautiful people of YouTube, and thank you for joining me today. I am back home after a little trip to Spain and to France and to Italy, and then to recover from the jet lag. I spent a few days in Las Vegas, where jet lag doesn't exist, and I wanted to just have a unplanned, completely open chat about my trip and my feelings and my thoughts along the way. I know that sounds very boring, and I'm sure it will be for the majority of you. But if you have an interest in Europe, or if perhaps you're contemplating different things, thinking, where should I live, what should I do, it may hold some value for you. And this was essentially where I was. I was embarking on the journey, partly work, partly leisure, with one mind set on potentially moving back to Europe and leaving the United States. And as much as I love the United States, and I have always been fascinated and interested in the United States, recent events have just been almost too much for me to take, and it's really had a heavy toll on my mental health, trying to coexist, to work in some cases, and live alongside people who I realize have voted in a certain way or who think in a certain way, and I feel that it's very difficult sometimes to accept. And I also, like many people right now, have a little bit of a fear of the future. I fear that we could end up in some kind of completely controlled, tyrannical, George Orwellian society, and I really am afraid of that. So, as I say, I embarked on this journey with one eye on potentially considering Europe, France or Spain as a future home. Of course, I did live in Spain for 3 years. I lived in Madrid from 2013 to 2016 and absolutely loved it. So this trip, I got to Madrid and arrived at 9:30 in the morning and couldn't check into my hotel until 3 p.m. Even though it was quite a fancy hotel, I spoiled myself a little bit. In fact, I got a really good rate on it and decided to do it and have some comfort in Madrid as my base. And yet I arrived at the hotel around about 10:30 and they had no rooms available, wouldn't let me check in, and wouldn't let me check in until 3 p.m. So this already started to strike me as a little bit unusual, a little bit un-American, I suppose you could say, because I travel a lot within the US and check-in times are usually 3 p.m, but I can't remember ever getting to a hotel in the US where I've been told that I had to wait. There's always something available that they could put me into if I arrive early. And so, after a 10-hour flight, hot, sweaty, exhausted, and a heavy heart from being rejected by the hotel, I walked just across the street and walked into the first little restaurant / bar that I could find and decided to just have a few snacks. I had boquerones con vinagre, which is something that I think about often and crave often from my time in Madrid. So it was a delight to have that, although I wouldn't necessarily have chosen to have it at that time of day, but I did. And I had a glass of water, and I think I had a beer as well, because hey, you're on vacation, you've just arrived in Spain, even if it's early in the morning, go for it. And I passed a lot of time there, and then I went back to the hotel and they said, no, come back at 3. So again, I went walking around, drifting all over the place. And as I was going into different things and looking at different places and chatting to different people, a familiar feeling came back to me, one that I had almost forgotten in time. And that is the feeling that when I lived in Madrid, as much as I loved it and as much as the people are wonderful and the place is wonderful, because my grasp of Spanish is not great, I always felt that I couldn't quite 100% integrate into the local culture, the local society. And I started to feel, the feeling is almost like being a little child that's trying to contribute to conversations or do little bits and pieces, but you're not really involved. You're kind of lost and left out. Ultimately, once I got into my room, and it was a beautiful room, I was able to have a quick shower, change my clothes, lie down for a little while. I think I had a nap for an hour or two, and then I went out feeling fresh and wonderful and happy. And when I was in Madrid 2 years ago, I remember thinking, wow, the place has really become very prosperous. It really feels quite affluent and on the rise. And immediately it struck me this time that it felt as if it had declined a little bit. It felt a little bit dirtier. Seemed like there were a lot more homeless people around. And I know that all of these feelings and perceptions depend on your specific circumstances at that moment in time. It can be how you're feeling, whether you're happy, sad, whether you're tired, whether you're fresh. But I was, at this point, I'd just had a shower, I'd had a nap, I felt quite fresh. I was feeling happy to be there. And it didn't feel quite as prosperous. It felt a little bit like it was going down. And this was a feeling over the next 4 or 5 days that I was in Madrid that I maintained. And I felt, although happy to be back there, I just felt a little bit like I was on the outside all the time. And maybe that's because, of course, tourism has become a real problem in Spain, as it has in most parts of Europe. A lot of people were obviously just seeing me as a tourist, and the place was very crowded in the tourist areas. The non-tourist areas, well, it was August, so it's typical in Madrid that people do actually leave the city and head out to the coast, but the majority of places were quiet or empty or closed. Most of them were closed, in fact, in places like Lavapiés, La Latina. And then, of course, places like Gran Via were just absolutely crowded and bustling and just overwhelming. After 5 days or so in Madrid, I got onto the high-speed train and I travelled to Barcelona. The train is wonderful, although the Wi-Fi doesn't work at all. I can confirm the Wi-Fi in the 2 hours and 45 minutes, both there and back, doesn't work. You can connect to it, but you can't do anything once you're connected to it. But aside from that, the seats are comfortable, the train is comfortable, the journey is scenic and pleasant, and gets you to Barcelona from Madrid, or from Barcelona to Madrid in 2 hours 45 minutes. When I arrived in Barcelona, and I don't know, it was my second time in Barcelona, and there's something about the place that it's just really not for me. I prefer Madrid a lot more to Barcelona. It's beautiful, it has great places. I spent quite a lot of time in the Gothic Quarter. I got to take a train out to the southern coast of Barcelona and go to a really beautiful restaurant with a swimming pool overlooking the ocean, the sea. And that was really nice. Spent some time just sitting on the beach with a beer. Again, really crowded on the beach. And pretty much every place that you go to around is quite crowded. You typically have to make a reservation or you have to wait for a table. And as I was walking around, one day I went out on my own just exploring, because I was with some friends in Barcelona. They were not with me that day, and I went exploring the Gothic Quarter, and I came out of the tube station, the metro station, and I went into one part of the city, and in fact the smell was so bad I thought, is it just me? And people were walking past me with their shirts like this, covering their nose. A lot of homeless people, very dirty places. And I was thinking, I'm going to just go back to the metro and go back to my hotel and just hang out there. But instead I decided to I got to the metro, crossed the street, went into a different part. And in fact, that was really beautiful. Very touristy, full of people, full of tourists, but it was beautiful. Little shops, restaurants, bars. I went into a really cool little bar and had a great time. But ultimately, I was quite happy to get on the train, go back to Madrid. I spent one more day in Madrid, went to El Diario, one of my favorite bars there, and just had some lunch, had some beers, and then made my way to the airport. And I had a 10 p.m. flight to Nice in France. The flight was with Iberia, and unfortunately we were delayed. We were delayed for about 1 hour, actually sitting on the plane on the runway waiting. And arrived in Nice around just before 1 o'clock in the morning. And I fortunately just got onto the last train within seconds and made it through to where my Airbnb was, where I was meeting a friend, and had really struggled to get any signal on my phone for Google Maps to find it, but eventually got some kind of a vague signal. And I was walking down the streets, and again I felt there were a lot of people. By now it was 2 o'clock in the morning. People out on the street just walking around, but getting really close to me, and not people who were just coming home from restaurants, people who looked like they were looking to pickpocket me. And anyway, I stepped off the main street, walked down into this little alley, and I thought, there are 3 wild dogs in the alley. I need to get back up onto the street. And then I realized they weren't dogs, they were rats. They were just dog-sized rats. And 3 running around, and so I slowly walked towards them, and of course they scattered away and disappeared into the holes, into the walls. And I walked through where they were, and I got to this door, which was the door to my Airbnb, and I opened it, and as I opened it I heard this and I looked down at the floor, and it was just cockroaches. Like a horror movie of cockroaches. Tens of them scattered all over, running around. So I kind of stamped my bag in there a little bit, and they scattered a little bit. Put my foot, ran to the stairs and went up the stairs. Of course, got into my Airbnb. It wasn't too bad. And I was checking under the blankets and looking, because I thought there could be cockroaches or rats or whatever. In the morning when I went down, I was shocked at the transformation, because it was one of the commercial, beautiful little alleys of Old Town Nice, full of tourists and little bakeries and restaurants. And I thought, just a few hours ago there were huge rats and cockroaches, and now they're replaced by tourists. And as I went out and got a coffee and got a croissant, I already started to struggle with the language barrier and I guess the perception of you being a tourist who was not truly too welcome. And I started already feeling like this is really not, it's not a place I could live. Okay, this is Old Town Nice, right at the castle, right at the beach. So of course it's a tourist mecca, and it's absolutely crowded with people. I mean, literally walking down the alleys, you're having to squeeze through like this because it's so crowded. And every restaurant or cafe that you go to, you have to wait in line in a queue. You have to give your name, wait. If you're lucky, they'll have a bar. You can go and have a beer while you're waiting for your table. And then you get there, and typically the service, again, maybe we're spoiled in the US, but you often wait, and then finally somebody comes and takes your order. You usually get your food or your drink pretty quickly, and then you wait again for a long time if you want anything more. And when you want to pay, you wait a long time. And for me, just in general, after all my years in Europe, I started feeling a little bit exhausted by the crowds, by the architecture is beautiful, it's really beautiful, but everything is old, which is beautiful in itself, but I just started feeling disconnected completely. And thankfully I was with friends. Thankfully I met with a wonderful friend who lives in Boston, who I've known since my time in Boston, and we had a great time together, and it was really wonderful spending time with her. And I was with one of my best friends who lives in Israel now, but was also in Nice at the time, so we spent a lot of time together, and that was fantastic. But other than the time with them, and of course the beautiful views of the sea and the beach, it wasn't necessarily my thing. One of the days in France, we decided, and by now I was with two friends who were gathering for a workshop that we were hosting, and we decided to take a day trip to Italy. And I wanted to go on the train. I've been on the train before, and it was really beautiful again. It's the train goes along the edge of the coast, and as you enter Italy, you're looking down you're right on the edge of a cliff looking down into the sea, and it's really fantastic. But they wanted to go to a city that the train doesn't go into. To me, that didn't really make much of a difference. But anyway, I lost the vote, and we drove. And my concern with driving was traffic and parking. And of course we drove along, we skipped Monte Carlo, Monaco. We decided to go to Monaco on the way back home. So we went up into the mountains, beautiful views, and it was a nice drive. And then as we got towards Italy, we hit traffic, and we were stuck in traffic for quite some time. And then when we got into San Remo, the city that we were going to, there was nowhere to park. We drove around and around and around, and this was 11 o'clock in the morning, 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning, and nowhere to park. We drove and drove and drove all over the place, and then finally we found some little tiny parking spot that we managed to just about squeeze into. I don't know how. And then we went and we found a nice place actually to have a couple of Aperol Spritz looking at the sea. And really we were enjoying that, and then we did a little bit of shopping, and then we went to have lunch, and the place was crowded, and it was a massive queue to get in, and we had to wait, and we finally got a table, and the service was terrible, and the food was also it was pasta, and pasta in Italy, you think, okay. Mine personally was not great, and it wasn't a great experience. And again, I was just tired and fed up with traffic, parking issues. And by this time I was starting to dream of returning to the US. Of course, I'm old, and I think I can appreciate most moments. And I was really appreciating and grateful for the fact that I was in Europe and I was doing something that many people could only dream of, and it was beautiful and it was fun and I was enjoying myself. But I was thinking, I'm looking forward to getting back to the US, where there is more space and more peace and calm, because even we always see these reels and stories on Instagram about work ethic in America versus Europe. And it's true that Americans often are afraid of taking vacation. Americans are so terrified of losing their jobs that they won't take vacation in case they are not missed or in case they get replaced. Whereas in Europe, you take your vacation and it's like 6 weeks of vacation that you take and nobody cares. In fact, it's essential. It's an important part of your job is to take vacation. However, outside of that vacation, in Europe, people just do not stop working. They work from 8 in the morning till 6, sitting at their desk, and it's full on all the time, at least in my experience anyway. Whereas I find in the US that people are a little bit more flexible in their day-to-day activity, and they're a little bit happier and smilier and singing and cheering and just enjoying things. Everything a sporting event is an event. It's a party. And yes, Europe has amazing football, soccer, and the cauldrons of sound and the singing that stem back to traditional, centuries-old tribal chants. But it's dark. It can be depressive. There's a real darkness to it that is borderline sinister. And I know in the UK in particular, sporting events often will result in fighting and real trouble. And this, of course, extends to other parts of Europe. In Spain, it's still a family event and it's quite friendly most of the time, but it's not the cheerful, light and bright event and party that it is in the US. And so I just started to feel these old, ancient walls of depression crumbling down on top of me, and I started longing to return to the US, and I started to think, I'm in the place that I should be right now. And so, to finish up, I flew back to the US, spent one night in my home, my apartment, and then in the morning I flew to Las Vegas because I'd booked that some time ago. I spent my birthday in Las Vegas at the Punk Rock Museum, and you can see the video of that if you want, if you look through my other videos. If anybody is still with me, I could probably say and do anything I want now because no one is left watching this video. But anyway, I truly enjoyed Las Vegas. Wild, crazy place. Best place to go if you want to recover from jet lag. I slept a lot. I was awake a lot. I ate and drank a lot. And in the end, I was absolutely shattered and exhausted. And I came back. I arrived back, and the DFW airport just looks so beautiful and so welcoming. And I got onto the Skylink and I went to the terminal, and the sun was setting and it was so beautiful. And I made it home, and right now I'm delighted to be home. I'm delighted to be in the US in spite of all the political insanity that is going on, and I really hope that we can continue to try to build a progressive, caring nation of hope. And this, for now, is where I want to be. Thank you for listening. Take care. Have a great weekend.